Hilda Connor touched down in Seoul, wearing a wedding dress that felt more like a funeral shroud. Because when you're selling yourself to save your father's life, you might as well look the part. The groom waited in a fortress of glass and marble, wheelchair-bound but radiating danger, eyes like a predator who'd learned to hunt from a throne. Bao Cheng, the crippled king of the Korean underworld, trillionaire crime lord. One marriage contract, one hidden medical lab, one terrifying secret already pumping through her veins. What happens when the medical researcher and the dying emperor realize she's not his bride, she's his lifeline? And the enemies who poisoned him are coming for her golden blood next. Hold tight. This contract is written in blood. If you're new here, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit notifications for more intense stories. Your support keeps these tales alive. Let's begin. Hilda Connor stood in the wreckage of her Chicago apartment, surrounded by rejection letters from medical journals and hospital bills stacked like tombstones. Her father was dying. Her career was dead. And the man in the tailored suit holding the contract promised both resurrections, for a price she didn't yet understand. Hilda Connor had become fluent in the language of medical debt. She could read the codes on billing statements like scripture, knew the exact shade of pink that marked a final notice, understood the specific weight of an envelope that contained bad news versus catastrophic news. Tonight's envelope was the latter. Stage 4. Inoperable without the experimental treatment. Cost: $375,000. Insurance status: denied. Payment plan options: none available. She sat in the hospital cafeteria at 2 in the morning, coffee gone cold in her hands, watching her father sleep through the glass partition. Malcolm Connor, the man who'd worked 3 jobs to put her through medical school, was dying because the same system she'd devoted her life to had decided his survival wasn't cost-effective. The irony tasted like copper on her tongue. Her phone buzzed. Another rejection email, this time from a research position she was overqualified for. They'd gone with a, quote, candidate whose background better aligns with our institutional culture. Translation: they'd hired someone whose skin color didn't make the board uncomfortable. Hilda had stopped counting these rejections after the first dozen. Her PhD meant nothing when gatekeepers decided her brilliance was threatening. Dr. Connor. She looked up. A man stood beside her table, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her father's monthly medication. Korean, late 30s, with the kind of neutral expression that came from delivering life-changing news as a profession. He held a leather portfolio that whispered money in a language Hilda had never spoken. "I'm not a doctor," she said flatly. "They made sure of that. You have a doctorate in hematology. That makes you a doctor." He sat without invitation, placing the portfolio between them like a chess piece. "And it makes you exactly what my employer needs. I'm not interested in pharmaceutical sales." "This isn't sales, Dr. Connor. This is salvation." He opened the portfolio. Inside was a single document, dense with legal text, and a photograph paper-clipped to the corner. A man in a wheelchair, sharp-featured and tattooed, looking at the camera with eyes that could start wars. "My employer is Bao Cheng. Perhaps you've heard of him." Hilda had. Everyone had, in the way you hear about hurricanes and stock market crashes. The Cheng family controlled shipping routes, pharmaceutical patents, and half the elected officials in 3 countries. They were the kind of wealthy that made wealth meaningless, operating in spaces where laws were suggestions and morality was negotiable. "He's dying," the man continued, matter of fact. "A rare degenerative blood condition caused by industrial poisoning. His medical team has exhausted conventional options." "Then he should try Johns Hopkins, not a cafeteria in Chicago. Johns Hopkins can't give him what he needs." The man turned the document toward her. "You have Rh null blood type, golden blood. Fewer than 50 people alive share your phenotype." Hilda's stomach dropped. She'd known about her blood type since college, had been told it made her a medical unicorn, valuable for research and transfusions. She'd never imagined it would make her a target. "Mr. Cheng is prepared to offer you a contract marriage. 1 year. In exchange, all of your father's medical expenses will be covered, immediately, and in perpetuity. You'll also receive a signing bonus of $5 million and guaranteed employment in any research institution of your choosing when the contract expires." The numbers didn't feel real. They couldn't be real. "What does he want from me?" "Companionship, public appearances, and periodic medical procedures to stabilize his condition." The clinical phrasing didn't hide what he meant. They wanted her blood. They wanted to plug her into their dying emperor, like a dialysis machine with a pulse. "This is insane. This is survival, Dr. Connor. His and your father's." The man produced a pen, black and heavy, and set it on top of the contract. "The treatment your father needs begins tomorrow morning, or it becomes too late. This offer expires in 2 hours. Through the glass, Hilda watched her father's chest rise and fall, each breath more labored than the last. She thought about the rejection letters, the closed doors, the system that had crushed them both beneath its indifference. She thought about golden blood and gilded cages and the specific kind of desperation that makes monsters look like saviors. Her hand reached for the pen. Where do I sign? The private jet touched down in Seoul at dawn, and Hilda watched the city materialize through the window like a circuit board coming to life, all glass towers and neon veins pulsing with commerce. She'd signed the papers 18 hours ago. Her father was already in surgery. There was no turning back now, only forward into whatever fresh hell she'd purchased with her blood type and desperation. A convoy of black SUVs waited on the tarmac, engines purring like predators. No customs, no passport control. Money at this altitude operated outside the normal rules of gravity. The drive took 40 minutes through neighborhoods that grew progressively more isolated, more fortified. By the time they reached the Cheng estate, Hilda understood she wasn't entering a home. She was entering a compound. 20-foot walls topped with cameras that tracked their approach, guards with earpieces, and the unmistakable bulge of concealed weapons. Gates that looked designed to withstand siege warfare. The main house rose beyond the walls like a monument to cold ambition, all white marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed nothing. Beautiful and sterile. A mausoleum for the living. Mrs. Cheng. The suited man from Chicago appeared at her car door. In Seoul, he had a name. David Lim, Chief of Staff. Your husband is waiting. The words felt obscene. Husband. As if signing a contract made the lie real. They led her through corridors that smelled of antiseptic and expensive cologne, past staff who averted their eyes like she was already a ghost. The house was silent in the way museums are silent, every surface polished to inhuman perfection. No warmth, no life, just wealth displayed like taxidermy. The master suite occupied the entire top floor. David opened the double doors without knocking. Bao Cheng sat in his wheelchair near the windows, backlit by the Seoul skyline. And Hilda's first thought was that the photograph hadn't done him justice. Sharp cheekbones, black hair swept back to reveal a face that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so carefully emptied of expression. Tattoos crawled up his exposed forearms, geometric patterns that looked tribal and surgical at once. He wore black silk pajamas that probably cost more than her medical school loans, and he looked at her the way a jeweler might examine a stone, assessing cut and clarity and value. Dr. Connor. His English was perfect, accent barely noticeable. Welcome to your new home. Mr. Cheng. Hilda refused to use the other title. Thank you for your hospitality. Hospitality implies choice. He wheeled forward with surprising speed, closing the distance between them. Up close, she could see the signs of his illness. Shadows beneath his eyes like bruises. Skin with the papery quality of someone whose body was consuming itself. You're here because you have something I need. Let's not pretend this is anything else. Agreed. She met his gaze and held it. When do we start? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He gestured to a door she hadn't noticed, hidden in the wall paneling. The medical suite is through there. We begin now. The room beyond looked like it belonged in a hospital, not a home. Monitoring equipment, IV stands, a surgical chair that resembled something from a dentist's nightmare, and along one wall, a refrigeration unit with glass doors that revealed rows of empty blood bags waiting to be filled. A woman in scrubs stood ready, Korean and professional, not meeting Hilda's eyes. The nurse, presumably, or the executioner's assistant. Lie down, Bao said, wheeling himself beside the chair. Not a request. Hilda's legs moved on autopilot, carrying her to the chair, even as her brain screamed warnings. She'd done blood draws before, donated regularly in medical school. This was different. This was being harvested. The nurse worked efficiently, sliding the needle into Hilda's vein with practiced ease. The sting was sharp, then dulled to an ache. She watched her blood flow through the clear tubing, dark and viscous, filling the first bag with steady purpose. Bao watched too, expression unreadable. How often? Hilda asked. Twice weekly. More if I'm deteriorating. And if I deteriorate? You won't. He said it with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything. We have the best nutritionists, supplements, monitoring. You're worth too much to damage. Worth. Not valuable. Not precious. Worth. Like livestock or investment property. The bag filled slowly. Hilda counted her heartbeats, watched the Seoul skyline blur through sudden tears she refused to let fall. Her father was alive. That's what mattered. She could survive this. She was a researcher, trained to observe and adapt. She would find the pattern, locate the weakness, and engineer her escape. But first, she had to survive the cage. The bag came free with a wet sound. The nurse immediately hung it beside Bao's chair, prepping the transfusion line. Welcome to the family, Dr. Connor, Bao said, and smiled for the first time. It didn't reach his eyes. Hilda woke to the sound of machines beeping in harmony, a medical symphony she'd grown to hate. 3 days in the gilded cage, and she'd learned its rhythms. Breakfast at 7, delivered by silent staff. Blood draw at 9, lunch at noon, monitoring at 3, dinner at 6, with a husband who treated conversation like a negotiation. The rest of the time, she was free to explore her prison. The house had a gym she didn't use, a library filled with books in languages she couldn't read, and a medical wing that looked better equipped than most teaching hospitals. It was the medical wing that drew her back, researchers' curiosity overriding survivors' caution. She waited until 2 in the morning, when even the guards grew drowsy, and slipped through the hidden door in the master suite. The medical room was dark except for the glow of monitoring equipment, screens displaying data in real time. She recognized her own vitals first, heart rate and blood pressure transmitted from the discreet fitness tracker they'd given her. Tracking the merchandise. But it was the filing cabinet that called to her, industrial and locked, tucked behind the refrigeration unit. She'd watched the nurse access it during yesterday's draw, had memorized the combination through the reflection in the glass doors. 3 attempts and the lock clicked open. The files inside were organized with military precision. Each folder bore a name, a photograph, and a blood type designation. She pulled the first one. Sarah Mitchell. O negative. Chicago. Status: declined. Another. Maria Santos. B negative. Sao Paulo. Status: incompatible. 5 more folders, each documenting a woman who'd been approached, tested, evaluated. Some declined, some weren't matches. One had simply disappeared with a red stamp across her file. Deceased. Then she found her own folder, thicker than the others. The photograph was from her university ID, years old, back when she still believed merit mattered more than melanin. Behind it, medical records she'd never authorized anyone to access. Blood work from her annual physicals. Genetic screening from a research study she'd participated in during grad school. Even her childhood vaccination records. They'd been building a dossier on her for years, but it was the scientific brief that made her blood freeze. Subject exhibits Rh null phenotype, also designated golden blood, she read, hands trembling. Frequency: approximately 1 in 6 million. Universal donor for rare blood types. Critical note: subject's blood demonstrates unusual compatibility with neurotoxin-affected cells, showing 73% greater cellular regeneration in preliminary trials compared to standard Rh null samples. Preliminary trials. They'd tested her blood before she even knew they existed. She flipped pages, found detailed projections. Transfusion schedules extending 18 months. Quantities measured in liters, not pints. Supplementation protocols designed to maximize production while minimizing donor fatigue. The clinical language couldn't hide what she was reading. A manufacturing plan for a human commodity. You weren't supposed to find that for at least another week. Hilda spun. Bao sat in the doorway, wheelchair silent on the polished floor, watching her with those predator eyes. He wore a black robe, and she could see the fresh bandage on his arm where they'd transfused her blood hours ago. You've been spying on me since grad school. Her voice shook with rage. This whole thing, the marriage, the contract, it's just industrial farming. I'm livestock, your survival. He wheeled forward, not bothering to deny it. Mine, and eventually yours. That neurotoxin in my system? It was engineered by the Zhao family to assassinate me slowly, make it look like genetic disease. Untraceable, untreatable. I've spent 3 years and $500 million searching for a cure. And you found me instead. I found hope. He gestured to the files scattered across the floor. Every woman in those folders said no or couldn't help. You're the only one whose blood doesn't just sustain me, it heals me. That 73% regeneration rate means I might actually survive this. So you bought me. I saved your father. His voice hardened. I gave you what every hospital and research institution denied you. Purpose and compensation. You want to be angry? Fine. But don't pretend you didn't know this was transactional. Hilda stared at him, this broken emperor who'd turned her into a medical device with a pulse. He wasn't wrong. She'd known the contract was too generous, the terms too vague. She'd simply been desperate enough not to ask questions. How long? She demanded. How long before you've taken enough? The projections say 18 months for full cellular regeneration. After that, periodic maintenance doses. And if I refuse? If I just stop? Bao's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his eyes. Your father's treatment continues, as long as our agreement does. Breach of contract has consequences. There it was. The velvet glove removed, the iron fist revealed. Hilda looked at the files, at the women who'd escaped or been discarded, at her own folder thick with surveillance and science. She was a resource to be extracted, managed, depleted. The marriage was a legal shield. The contract was a leash, and she was trapped in a fortress with a dying man who owned her by the pint. Twice weekly, she said finally. No more. And I want full access to your medical files. If I'm your cure, I'm going to find a permanent one. Bao studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Welcome to the project, Dr. Connor. The emergency call came at 3 in the morning, shattering Hilda's uneasy sleep. David Lim's voice through the intercom was clipped, urgent. Medical suite. Now. She ran through the corridors in her nightgown, heart hammering against her ribs, and found chaos waiting. 2 guards flanked the door, automatic weapons drawn. Inside, Bao slumped in his wheelchair, conscious but pale, his black shirt soaked through with blood that looked black in the fluorescent lighting. What happened? Hilda snapped into doctor mode, training overriding everything else. Disagreement at the dock, Bao said through gritted teeth. The other party brought a knife. The other party is dead. David added flatly. But not before he got close. Hilda grabbed surgical gloves, antiseptic, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Get him on the exam table. Now. It took 3 men to lift him, and Hilda noticed how Bao's jaw clenched with something beyond physical pain. Humiliation, she realized. He hated being moved like cargo, hated the reminder of his paralysis. She cut away his shirt with medical scissors, revealing the damage. A slash across his ribs, deep but clean, narrowly missing major vessels. The kind of wound that would scar but wouldn't kill. Not immediately, anyway. But it was the rest of him that made her pause. His torso was a canvas of ink and history. Geometric tattoos she'd glimpsed before covered his chest and arms, but beneath them, revealed in the harsh light, was scar tissue. Old injuries mapped across his skin like a battlefield. Bullet wounds, knife marks, burns that looked deliberate. And lower, where his spine curved, a surgical scar that ran from mid-back to tailbone, thick and angry even years after healing. Stop staring and start stitching, Bao said. But his voice lacked its usual edge. Hilda irrigated the wound, numbed the area with local anesthetic. Her hands were steady even as her mind raced. This needs 12 stitches minimum. You should be in a hospital. Hospitals ask questions. I'm not a trauma surgeon. You're what I have. He met her eyes. You've done sutures before. She had. On cadavers and supervised patients. Not on mafia lords bleeding out in secret medical wings. But his blood was already seeping into her from twice-weekly transfusions. She supposed turnabout was fair play. The first stitch went in clean. Bao didn't flinch. The tattoos, Hilda said, working methodically. They're covering scars. Observant. The one on your spine, that's where they cut you. Not a question. His silence confirmed it. She tied off another stitch, then another. The rhythm was meditative, intimate in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her fingers on his skin, his blood under her nails, the quiet between them, like a confession waiting to happen. It was my brother, Bao said finally, voice low. Jinhai, 3 years ago, at a family summit in Busan. He wanted control of the western shipping routes, thought our father favored me. He was right. Hilda paused mid-stitch. Your own brother paralyzed you. He poisoned my wine with the neurotoxin first, slow-acting, undetectable. Then he staged a car accident on the drive home, made sure I was thrown from the vehicle in just the right way. Bao's hands clenched the edges of the exam table. When I woke up in the hospital, I couldn't feel my legs. The doctor said severed spinal cord, irreversible damage. My father said I was weak for letting it happen. Jesus. The word escaped before she could stop it. No gods in this family. Just predators and prey. He watched her finish the stitching. Jinhai runs the European operations now. Sends me birthday cards every year with pictures of himself walking. The cruelty was breathtaking. Hilda cleaned the wound site, applied sterile bandaging, her anger building with each piece of tape. The neurotoxin. That's what you're really fighting, isn't it? Not just the paralysis. The toxin is eating me from the inside out. The car accident just gave everyone something visible to blame. Bao's voice went harder. My father thinks I'm dying of my own weakness. The board thinks I'm a crippled relic. Only Jinhai knows the truth, and he's waiting for me to die so he can take the rest. Hilda stepped back, surveying her work. The stitches were clean, professional. He'd have another scar to hide under ink. And I'm your secret weapon. You're my only weapon. He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw past the cold emperor to the man beneath. Trapped in a broken body, poisoned by family, ruling an empire from a wheelchair while everyone waited for him to fall. Your blood is buying me time to find who manufactured the toxin. Once I have that, I have leverage. To destroy your brother. To survive him. Bao reached out, caught her wrist with surprising strength. His thumb pressed against her pulse point, feeling her heartbeat. You want to know why I chose you? It wasn't just the blood type. It was your research proposal, the one Johns Hopkins rejected. Cellular regeneration through synthetic blood matrices. You were trying to cure the incurable. Hilda's breath caught. You read my research. Every word. You're brilliant, Dr. Connor. They buried you because you threatened their mediocrity. His grip tightened slightly. Help me synthesize a cure, and you'll have resources those institutions never dreamed of. We can save each other. The moment stretched between them, dangerous and electric. His hand on her wrist, her blood in his veins. Two desperate people, trapped in a fortress built on violence and necessity. Hilda pulled away first. Get some rest. Those stitches need 48 hours to set. But as she left the medical suite, she could still feel the heat of his touch, the weight of his words. They were using each other to survive. The question was who would finish using who first. The explosion came at 4 in the afternoon, shattering the library windows where Hilda had been reading Bao's medical files. Glass rained down like frozen rain, and somewhere in the compound, alarms began screaming. She hit the floor on instinct, arms covering her head, research training useless against the reality of violence. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard gunfire. Not the movie kind, sharp cracks in rhythm. Real gunfire, chaotic and overlapping, the sound of men trying to kill each other in close quarters. David Lim appeared in the doorway, weapon drawn, face transformed from polished professional to something feral. Mrs. Chang with me, now. Hilda ran, bare feet finding traction on marble floors, following David through corridors that had become a war zone. Guards sprinted past them toward the sound of combat. Blood streaked one wall, fresh and bright. A body sprawled near the stairs, one of their own, eyes staring at nothing. They burst into the master suite. Bao sat at his desk, tablet in hand, watching security feeds with terrifying calm. On the screens, armed men in tactical gear poured through the breached south wall, moving with military precision toward the main house. Zhao family, Bao said without looking up. 12 hostiles, possibly more in reserve. They're going for the medical wing. Going for her, Hilda realized. Destroy the cure, kill the king. David, put her in the panic room, Bao commanded. No. The word came out before Hilda could stop it. Both men turned to stare. If they damage you while I'm locked away, you could bleed out before I can help. I stay. This isn't a negotiation. Neither was the contract. She moved to his side, scanning the monitors. You need me alive to survive. That means I need you alive to keep my father in treatment. We're stuck with each other. Gunfire erupted closer now, inside the house. On the screens, 3 intruders reached the second-floor landing. Bao's men engaged them, bodies falling on both sides. Bao's jaw tightened, but he nodded once. David, secure the medical suite. Full lockdown protocol. Dr. Connor stays with me. David hesitated, then disappeared into the chaos. Hilda heard the hidden door seal behind him, heavy locks engaging. They were alone now, Emperor and Bloodbank, trapped in a room that suddenly felt very small. Bao's fingers flew across the tablet, accessing comm channels. His voice when he spoke was ice and iron, nothing human in it. East Wing team, collapse back to the main stairwell. Let them think they're advancing. West Wing, flank through the servants' corridor. I want a crossfire. On screen, his men obeyed without question. The intruders pushed forward, confident, right into the trap. The ambush was surgical. Muzzle flashes lit the corridor like strobe lights, and when the smoke cleared, 5 hostiles were down. But more kept coming. They're desperate, Hilda said, watching a new wave breach the north entrance. This isn't a raid, it's a suicide mission. The Zhao family needs me dead before the next board meeting. Bao switched cameras, tracking the assault in real time. Jin Hai promised them my territory if they finish what the poison started. An explosion rocked the house, closer this time. The lights flickered. On screen, smoke billowed from the east corridor. They'd used breaching charges on the reinforced doors. Bao's hand trembled slightly on the tablet. Hilda saw it, saw the way his breathing had gone shallow. The stress was triggering his condition. Body systems failing under pressure his transfusions hadn't fully compensated for. How long since your last treatment? She demanded. 30 hours. Too long. She could see him deteriorating in real time, skin going waxy, that familiar papery quality emerging. You need blood. Now. After. We survive first. Then I feed. You won't survive if you pass out. Hilda grabbed his wrist, checking his pulse. Thready, weak. Where's the emergency kit? Behind the bookshelf. Third panel. She found it. Medical supplies organized for exactly this scenario. Portable IV stand, pre-labeled bags of her blood from the most recent draw, stored at temperature. They'd planned for war in the gilded cage. She worked fast, hanging the bag, prepping the line. Don't move. Not much risk of that, Bao said darkly, but he extended his arm. The needle slid home. Her blood flowed into him while outside. Men died, protecting their investment in both of them. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. On screen, Bao's remaining guards were winning. The intruders, realizing they'd failed, tried to retreat. Bao's voice cut through the calm. No survivors. I want them buried in the harbor before sunrise. The execution was methodical. Hilda watched, transfusion bag draining steadily, as the last hostile fell in the garden. 14 bodies. Some of them couldn't have been older than 20. When silence finally returned, Bao slumped in his wheelchair, color slowly returning to his face. The transfusion had saved him, but his eyes when they met Hilda's were haunted. This is the life, he said quietly. This is what you signed up for. Hilda looked at the blood bag, half empty now, then at the carnage on screen. Bodies being dragged away like trash. Her blood keeping a killer alive so he could orchestrate more killing. I know, she said, and found she meant it. She'd stopped being just a researcher the moment she'd signed that contract. Now she was complicit, invested, bound by blood and necessity to a man who waged war from a wheelchair. The question was whether she'd become his cure or his executioner. The labs occupied an entire subterranean level that Hilda hadn't known existed, accessed through an elevator hidden behind a wine cellar that probably cost more than her childhood home. Bao wheeled beside her as they descended, his color better than she'd seen in weeks, the transfusions and her constant monitoring finally showing results. 3 million in equipment, he said, as the doors opened onto a space that made her medical school facilities look like a high school chemistry set. Staff of 12, though I've given them the week off. Everything you need is here. Hilda stepped into a researcher's fever dream. Mass spectrometers, gene sequencers, a chemical synthesis station that belonged in a pharmaceutical company. Refrigeration units hummed with organized samples, each labeled in Korean and English. Computer stations lined one wall, processing power that could model molecular interactions in real time. This is insane, she breathed. This is survival. Bao rolled to a workstation, entering credentials that brought the systems online. I've been throwing money at this problem for 3 years. Hired the best minds, bought stolen research from competitors, even kidnapped a neurotoxicologist from Beijing for 6 months. You kidnapped a scientist. He was well compensated. And he failed. Bao pulled up files on the main screen, chemical formulas that looked like architecture for molecules. The toxin is synthetic, designer-made, targets specific neural pathways while mimicking natural cellular decay. Brilliant and untraceable. Hilda moved closer, her researcher brain engaging despite everything. The molecular structure was elegant, almost beautiful in its efficiency. Whoever designed it understood biochemistry at a level most academics never reached. It's a cascade toxin, she said, thinking aloud. Initial damage triggers secondary failures, which trigger tertiary breakdown. That's why standard treatments don't work. You're not fighting one poison, you're fighting a chain reaction. Exactly. Something like respect flickered in Bao's eyes. My people have been trying to interrupt the cascade for years. They can slow it, stabilize me temporarily but never stop it completely. Because they're thinking about it wrong. Hilda's fingers flew over the keyboard, pulling up cellular models. They're trying to neutralize the toxin. But what if we don't fight the cascade? What if we give your body the tools to repair faster than the toxin can damage? She could see it now, the research proposal Johns Hopkins had rejected coming back to life, with $3 million of equipment behind it. Synthetic blood matrices, engineered to carry enhanced regeneration factors. Not a cure for the toxin, but a cure for its effects. My blood works because of the Rh null phenotype, she continued, excitement building, but also because my cells produce higher concentrations of certain growth factors. If I can isolate those factors, synthesize them artificially, we could create a treatment that doesn't require me. Bao was quiet for a long moment. You're trying to make yourself obsolete. I'm trying to save us both. She turned to face him. Your brother is waiting for you to die. Your enemies just sent 14 men to kill me. This arrangement isn't sustainable. Eventually, they'll succeed, or I'll run out of blood to give, or your body will reject my transfusions. We need a permanent solution. And if you succeed, his voice was carefully neutral. What happens to our contract? The question hung between them, weighted with implications. If she cured him, she had no leverage. He could terminate the agreement, keep her father's treatment as charity, and send her back to Chicago with a payoff and an NDA. She'd be free but powerless, unless she made herself invaluable in other ways. Then I stop being your blood bank and start being your medical director, Hilda said. This lab, these resources, they're wasted on hired researchers who don't have skin in the game. Give me full access, genuine authority, and I'll build you a pharmaceutical division that makes your shipping empire look quaint. Bao studied her with those predator eyes, seeing past the proposal to the ambition beneath. She was negotiating for real power now, not just survival. Demanding a seat at the table instead of a place on the medical equipment roster. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? A grateful victim? A temporary solution. He wheeled to the main terminal, began entering administrative credentials. I expected to drain you for 18 months and discard you when something better came along. The honesty was startling. Hilda watched him work, this broken emperor who'd bought her like laboratory equipment, and was now offering her keys to the kingdom's vault. What changed? She asked. Bao finished typing, and every terminal in the lab chimed with new access permissions. Her name appeared on screen after screen, clearance level upgraded to match his own. Unlimited budget authorization, personnel management rights. Everything. You stayed during the attack, he said quietly. You could have run, locked yourself away, let me bleed out while you negotiated with whoever won. Instead, you gave me your blood, while men were dying 50 feet away. He turned to face her fully. Loyalty is rare in my world, Dr. Connor. Competent loyalty is priceless. Hilda looked at the screens, at the power he'd just handed her. Enough to cure him, betray him, or build an empire of her own. The gilded cage had just opened, but she realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to leave anymore. She wanted to burn it down and rebuild it better. 6 months, she said. Give me 6 months with these resources, and I'll give you a cure. And if you fail, then we're both dead anyway, and the lab was a good last gesture. Bao's laugh was unexpected, genuine. Get to work, Dr. Connor. Show me what Johns Hopkins was too stupid to see. Hilda turned to the equipment, mind already racing through protocols and experiments. Somewhere above them, guards patrolled a fortress under siege. Her blood hung in refrigeration units, like savings accounts. Her father breathed easy in Chicago, paid for by her bondage. But down here, in $3 million of stolen and purchased science, she was finally doing what she was meant to do. Not surviving, creating. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning, but Hilda knew something was wrong when David Lim arrived at the lab at 7, flanked by 4 guards she didn't recognize. Mrs. Cheng, you need to come with us. She looked up from the centrifuge, 3 months of research crystallizing into results that had her working through the night. I'm in the middle of a synthesis run. Whatever it is, can wait 2 hours. It can't. David's expression was carved from stone. There's been a security breach. Your presence is required upstairs. The word breach sent ice through her veins. Hilda saved her work, locked down the systems, and followed David through corridors that felt different now, hostile. The guards weren't escorting her. They were arresting her. The boardroom occupied the West Wing's top floor, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Seoul. 20 people sat around a table designed for power plays, the Cheng family's inner circle. Bao at the head in his wheelchair, face carefully blank, and beside him, a man who could have been his twin if not for the cruel twist to his mouth and the way he stood, spine straight, legs working perfectly. Jinhai, the brother who'd poisoned and paralyzed him. Dr. Connor. Jinhai's English was accentless, educated at Oxford according to the file she'd read. Thank you for joining us. Please sit. The chair they'd left empty faced the entire board like a defendant's dock. Hilda sat, pulse hammering, meeting Bao's eyes across the table. He gave nothing away. We have a problem, Jinhai continued, activating the room's display screen. Last night, confidential medical records belonging to my brother were leaked to 3 rival organizations. Records detailing his condition, his treatment protocols, and his prognosis. The screen filled with documents Hilda recognized immediately. Her own reports, the synthesis notes, blood work analysis, showing exactly how compromised Bao's system remained despite months of transfusions. These leaks came from a single source. Jinhai's smile was surgical. The laboratory computer assigned to Dr. Connor, accessed using her credentials at 11:47 p.m. That's impossible. Hilda's voice came out steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. I was in the lab at that time, yes, but I didn't access those files. They're not even part of my current research. And yet the digital forensics are conclusive. An older man spoke up, board member Park, his Korean-accented English thick with accusation. Your login, your terminal, your research notes appended to the leak, which proves nothing except someone used my credentials. Hilda looked at Bao, willing him to see the setup. I've been working 16-hour days, trying to synthesize a cure. Why would I sabotage that? Money, Jinhai said simply. The Zhao family is offering $20 million for actionable intelligence on my brother's condition. Perhaps Dr. Connor decided her research wasn't progressing fast enough and needed alternative income. The accusation was so absurd, it took Hilda a moment to respond. I have unrestricted access to lab funds. If I wanted money, I'd just requisition it. For legitimate research purposes. Board member Kim leaned forward, elderly and sharp-eyed. This leak has endangered Mr. Cheng's life. 3 organizations now know exactly how to strike when he's most vulnerable. We have a traitor in our house. The room's attention focused on her like a blade. Hilda saw it clearly now. The political chess game playing out. Jinhai had framed her perfectly, turned her from asset to liability. If Bao defended her, he looked weak, controlled by foreign blood and feminine influence. If he executed her, he lost his cure, and proved he was dying without her. Either way, Jinhai won. The penalty for betraying this family is death. Jinhai's voice carried false regret. Brother, I know you've grown fond of your American doctor, but the evidence is overwhelming. She must be made an example. Bao's fingers drummed once on his wheelchair's armrest, the only sign of tension. The room waited, Hilda's future balanced on whatever calculation was happening behind those dark eyes. You're right, Bao said finally, and Hilda's heart stopped. Someone has betrayed this family. Someone with access to secure systems, knowledge of our protocols, and motivation to see me weakened before the annual review. He wheeled forward slightly, gaze sweeping the room before landing on his brother. Which is why I authorized Dr. Connor to leak those files yesterday afternoon. The silence was absolute. The documents you received were falsified, Bao continued, voice cold as winter. Showing me far weaker than I am, responding poorly to treatment, declining rapidly. I wanted to know which organizations you were feeding intelligence to, Jinhai. Now I do. Jinhai's composure cracked for just a moment, confusion flashing across his face. That's ridiculous. The board received reports from my head of security about a leak that occurred last night. Reports that I never authorized. Bao's smile was sharp enough to cut. Only 3 people knew about the falsified documents. Myself, Dr. Connor, and David Lim. Yet somehow the leak became common knowledge among the board. Tell me, brother, who informed you? The trap snapped shut beautifully. Hilda watched Jinhai realize he'd exposed himself. Proven he had sources inside Bao's security, feeding him real-time intelligence. The board members shifted uncomfortably, understanding dawning. The Zhao family approached me months ago, Bao said. Offered an alliance if I was weakened enough. I've been documenting every communication, every bribe, every promise made to destabilize this organization. He nodded to David, who distributed tablets around the table, including promises made to family members who thought a cripple couldn't defend his position. The tablets showed everything. Encrypted messages, financial transfers, photographs of secret meetings. Jinhai's coup attempt laid bare in digital evidence. You're lying, Jinhai said, but his voice lacked conviction. I'm surviving. Bao's gaze was pitiless. Dr. Connor has given me something you never could, brother. Time. Time to root out traitors. Time to document your treachery. Time to prove that a man in a wheelchair can still destroy those who underestimate him. Board member Park stood slowly. The evidence is clear. Jinhai Cheng has violated family law. I move for immediate expulsion and asset seizure. Vote was unanimous. Hilda watched Bao's brother escorted from the room by guards, saw the calculated cruelty in Bao's expression that matched his brother's perfectly. They were the same, she realized. Both poisonous, both brilliant. The only difference was that Bao had learned to use his weakness as a weapon. When the room finally cleared, only she and Bao remained. You used me as bait, Hilda said. I used you as an ally. He wheeled closer. Did you really think I'd believe you'd betray me after 3 months in the lab? You're many things, Dr. Connor, but you're not stupid enough to kill the patient you're trying to cure. You could have warned me. Your reaction had to be genuine. His hand found hers, squeezed once. I needed Jinhai to think he'd won, to overplay his hand. Your fear sold the performance. Hilda should have been angry, should have raged at being manipulated, used as a pawn in family warfare. Instead, she felt something darker crystallize inside her chest. Understanding, respect. She'd spent 3 months learning to survive in the gilded cage. Now Bao had shown her how to wield it. The synthesis is almost complete, she said. 2 more weeks and we'll have a working prototype. Good. Bao released her hand, expression shifting back to the cold emperor. Because Jinhai may be gone, but his allies remain. We need you healthy and working, not bleeding out in a boardroom. As Hilda returned to the lab, she realized the cage had changed shape again. She wasn't livestock anymore, wasn't even just a researcher. She was a weapon in a war she was only beginning to understand. And she was starting to enjoy the fight. The kidnapping happened in the one place Hilda had allowed herself to feel safe. The laboratory, 3 floors underground, surrounded by guards and security systems that made Fort Knox look vulnerable. She'd been running the final trial of the synthetic serum, watching her life's work crystallize into a solution that glowed faintly blue under the UV lights, when the ventilation system began pumping something sweet and chemical into the air. She managed 3 steps toward the emergency alarm before her legs stopped working. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was David Lim stepping through the lab doors, expression carved from regret and necessity, and she understood. The betrayal had come from inside all along. She woke to the smell of salt water and rust, hands zip-tied behind her back, head pounding from whatever they'd used to drug her. The room was industrial, all concrete and exposed pipes, the kind of space that existed off official records. A shipping container, she realized, feeling the subtle sway beneath her. They were on water. "Dr. Connor, welcome back." The voice came from behind her, Korean accented but fluent. Footsteps circled into view, and Hilda found herself looking at a woman in her 50s, elegant in the way money and violence combined to create. Designer suit, perfect manicure, and eyes that held the same predatory calculation she'd seen in both Cheng brothers. "I'm Minjun Zhao," the woman said. "I believe you've made my organization's life quite difficult these past few months." Hilda's throat was dry, voice coming out scratchy. "Where am I?" 40 kilometers offshore. Far enough that no one will hear you scream, close enough that we can deliver pieces of you back to Baocheng in relatively fresh condition. Minjun smiled, pleasant as poison. "I'm told you're quite attached to each other now." How sweet. How exploitable. The implications crystallized with horrifying clarity. They were going to use her to destroy him, leverage his attachment into submission or suicide. Either he'd cave to their demands, or they'd kill her slowly and break whatever was left of his will to fight. "He won't negotiate," Hilda said, forcing confidence she didn't feel. "You know how he operates. He doesn't surrender." "Everyone surrenders when properly motivated." Minjun nodded to someone behind Hilda. Hands grabbed her arm, extending it across a metal table that appeared from nowhere. "Your blood kept him alive. Let's see how he functions when we start sending it back in jars." The knife was surgical, sharp enough that Hilda barely felt the first cut across her forearm. But she felt the blood flow, warm and fast, too fast. They weren't taking samples. They were draining her. Terror clawed at her throat. She was going to die in a shipping container, bled out like livestock, her last contribution to Bao's empire measured in pints and trauma. Except the door exploded inward before they'd taken more than a cup. The blast was concussive, deafening, turning the container's entrance into twisted metal and smoke. Through the haze came gunfire, systematic and brutal. The sound of professional killers working with absolute efficiency. Minjun's guards returned fire, but they were outmatched, outgunned, dying, before they understood what was happening. Then Bao rolled through the smoke in his wheelchair, and Hilda had never seen anything more terrifying or beautiful in her life. He wasn't alone. 20 men flanked him, body armor and automatic weapons, moving like a military unit. But it was Bao who commanded the space, tablet mounted to his chair, directing the slaughter with the same cold precision he'd used to orchestrate boardroom executions. "Clear left," he snapped into his comm. 2 hostiles behind the support beam. "Minjun Zhao is mine." Minjun was already moving, weapon drawn, but David Lim appeared from the smoke and put 3 rounds in her chest before she'd raised her gun halfway. She dropped, expensive suit blooming red, eyes wide with the surprise of mortality. David moved to Hilda next, cutting her restraints with quick efficiency. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Had to make them believe the betrayal was real. Bao's orders. Hilda's arm was still bleeding, head spinning from blood loss and adrenaline. "You bastards." "Later," Bao said, wheeling close enough to touch. His hands found her face, tilted it up to meet his gaze, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Raw, undisguised terror at how close he'd come to losing her. "Can you walk?" "I think so." "Good. Because we're burning everything." He nodded to his men. "Thermite charges on every Zhao facility within 50 kilometers. I want their shipping routes, their warehouses, their accountants' vacation homes reduced to ash by sunrise." It wasn't rescue. It was apocalypse. They extracted her from the container while behind them, charges detonated across the harbor. Zhao properties erupted in white-hot flames that turned night into day, decades of infrastructure immolating in coordinated destruction. Bao had brought scorched earth tactics to a kidnapping, and Hilda realized with crystalline clarity that this was what love looked like in the underworld. Not flowers or poetry. Annihilation of anyone who threatened what you valued. The helicopter ride back to Seoul was silent, except for the medic bandaging Hilda's arm. Bao sat beside her, hand wrapped around hers with crushing intensity, watching her like she might disappear if he blinked. "The serum," she said finally, exhaustion making her voice slur. "Did they destroy the lab?" "David secured it before the extraction. Everything's intact. Then we can finish it. 2 weeks, maybe less now that the synthesis protocol is confirmed." She met his eyes. "You can be free of this." "Free of me?" Bao's grip tightened. "I don't want free." His voice was rough, stripped of imperial coldness. "I spent 3 years searching for a cure, convinced survival was all that mattered. Then you walked into my fortress, and I realized surviving and living are different things." "Bao, I watched them take you on the security feeds. Saw you disappear from my house, my protection. And I understood something." He raised her bandaged hand to his lips, kissed gentle against her knuckles. I would rather die of the poison than live in a world where you don't exist. That's not strategy or transaction. That's just truth. Hilda's throat closed around words she couldn't say. Emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Somewhere in the months of blood draws and research, of attacks survived and empires fought, she'd stopped being his victim. She'd become his partner, his equal, his choice. The contract, she started, burns tomorrow. Bao's smile was real, vulnerable in ways the cold emperor never allowed. You stay because you want to, leave because you want to, but know that if you stay, it won't be as my cure, it'll be as my queen. Below them, Seoul glittered like a circuit board, the city they'd fought to protect pulsing with life and commerce. The Qing Empire spread out beneath them, vast and violent, and theirs to reshape. Hilda leaned her head against Bao's shoulder, exhaustion and blood loss and something fiercer pulling her down. 2 weeks, she whispered. Then we decide what kind of empire we're building. His arm wrapped around her, holding her close as they flew toward dawn. Together, he agreed. And for the first time since signing that contract in a Chicago hospital, Hilda believed in something beyond survival. She believed in choice. The contract burned in a platinum wastebasket on the terrace overlooking Seoul, pages curling into ash while the city sprawled beneath them like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Hilda watched the flames consume clauses about blood draws and compensation packages, legal language that had bound her to a dying emperor for what felt like a lifetime compressed into 9 months. Bao sat beside her in his wheelchair, the synthetic serum working through his system for the 3rd consecutive week. His color was better, stronger. The tremors that had plagued his hands were gone. The medical monitors in the master suite showed cellular regeneration rates that made her research team weep with professional jealousy. He was healing, actually genuinely healing. And she'd done that. Wire transfer confirmed, Bao said, checking his tablet. 5 million to your account as promised, plus another 20 as a research bonus. Your father's treatment is endowed in perpetuity, managed by a trust that continues regardless of what happens to me or my organization. Hilda nodded, watching smoke curl into the night sky. Financial freedom, professional vindication, her father's life secured, everything she'd signed away her autonomy for, handed back without strings attached. There's also this. He produced an envelope, cream-colored and heavy. A position offer from Stanford Medical. Full professorship, unlimited research budget, your own lab. They're very interested in your work on synthetic blood matrices. I may have sent them your recent publications. You got me a job at Stanford. I got you away from me. His voice was carefully neutral, the cold emperor making a reappearance. You fulfilled every obligation. Given me a cure, saved my life repeatedly, helped me purge traitors from my organization. The contract is void. You're free to leave. Hilda looked at him, really looked. Even healing, he carried the weight of his empire like scar tissue, visible in the set of his shoulders and the watchfulness that never quite left his eyes. He'd offered her everything except the one thing that mattered, a reason to stay that wasn't obligation or survival. What do you want, Bao? The question seemed to catch him off guard. His fingers stilled on the tablet. What I want is irrelevant. You've earned your freedom. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that doesn't make me a monster. He set the tablet aside, met her gaze with something raw in his expression. I bought you, Hilda. Exploited your desperation, drained your blood, used you as bait in family warfare. Offering you freedom is the absolute minimum of human decency. And if I don't want freedom? The words hung between them like a confession. Bao's jaw tightened, and she saw him calculating, trying to determine if this was gratitude or Stockholm Syndrome or something more complicated that neither of them had vocabulary for. You're not thinking clearly, he said finally. 9 months ago, you were a researcher with a dying father. Now you're a woman with PTSD and a bank account funded by blood money. You need distance, therapy, time to remember who you are outside of this. I know exactly who I am. Hilda moved closer, her hand finding his. I'm the woman who synthesized a cure everyone said was impossible, who survived assassination attempts and family coups, who looked at a broken emperor and saw someone worth saving, not because I had to, but because I chose to. Hilda, the contract is burned. My father is safe. I have job offers and money and every reason to walk away. She squeezed his hand, but I spent 9 months building something here. Not just the serum, an empire that could be different. A medical division that actually cures people instead of just exploiting them. A future where power serves something beyond violence. Bao's thumb traced circles on her wrist, over the faint scars from months of blood draws. You want to reform a criminal organization from the inside. That's insane. No more insane than marrying a stranger to harvest her blood. Hilda smiled. We're past conventional wisdom, Bao. The question is whether you want a partner or a memory. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the last of the contract crumble to ash. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of empires and the vulnerability of a man who'd forgotten how to hope for anything beyond survival. I want you to stay, not as an obligation or a medical asset. He struggled with the words, as the person who sees past a wheelchair and the violence to whatever's left of the man underneath. There's more than you think. Hilda leaned down, kissed him with the deliberate certainty of someone who'd weighed every option and chosen the most complicated path. But you're right about one thing. If I stay, things change. No more treating me like I'm fragile. No more making decisions for my own good. We're partners, or we're nothing. Partners. Bao tested the word, then pulled her closer. In business and everything else? Everything else. Below them, Seoul pulsed with midnight energy, millions of lives intersecting in patterns of commerce and survival. The Qing Empire spread across shipping routes and pharmaceutical patents, shadow networks, and legitimate enterprises. It was vast and violent and corrupt, built on generations of blood and ambition. But it was also theirs to reshape. The board meets next week, Bao said, his arm around her waist now, holding her like she was something precious instead of purchased. I'm announcing a new organizational structure. Medical division gets equal standing with shipping and finance. You'll have full autonomy, budget authority, and a seat at the table. Just medical? What else? Humanitarian initiatives. Legitimate pharmaceutical development. Using our networks to actually help people, instead of just exploiting them. Hilda felt the vision crystallizing, months of observations and anger coalescing into purpose. If we're going to run an empire, let's run one that does more than just survive. Let's build something that matters. Bao laughed, the sound genuine and surprised. You want to turn a crime syndicate into a force for good, while still maintaining our revenue streams and eliminating our enemies. Why not? We've already done the impossible once. She gestured to him, to the healing man who'd been dying 9 months ago. You're living proof that broken things can be fixed if you're willing to try. That was science. This is faith. Hilda settled against him, watching the city lights blur into constellations. Faith that two desperate people who found each other in the worst circumstances can build something better than what they inherited. The last piece of contract ash drifted over the terrace railing, disappearing into Seoul's night sky. Somewhere in the compound, guards patrolled the walls. In the lab below, her research team was already working on the next impossible problem. Her father slept peacefully in Chicago, breathing easy for the first time in years. And here, on a terrace overlooking an empire built on blood and ambition, Hilda Connor chose her future. Not because a contract demanded it, not because survival required it, but because she'd learned that the most dangerous thing in the world wasn't a dying emperor or a criminal syndicate, or a system designed to crush people like her. It was a black woman with golden blood, a chemistry degree, and the audacity to believe she could change everything. So, Bao said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. Where do we start? Hilda smiled, feeling the weight of possibility settle around her shoulders like a crown she'd earned instead of inherited. With the next impossible thing, she said, and then the one after that. Together, they watched dawn break over Seoul, the city transforming from shadow to light, old empires dying while new ones waited to be born. The contract was ash. The future was theirs to write, and Hilda Connor, researcher and queen, was just getting started. The end. Hi lovely viewers. Thanks for watching till the end. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, leave a comment, and click on the notification bell for more exciting stories.